Welcome back. So River State is very much on our minds this morning, as it is on the political front burner. And we're trying to understand the legal implications of the actions of the President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria as far as his intentions are concerned, which is ultimately to restore peace. As he has said, he cannot continue to watch as events unfold in River State, particularly with a threat, a seeming threat to national assets. And joining us to understand the legal implications of the president's action this morning is Barrister Jiti, Ogunye, a legal practitioner who joins us right here in our Lagos studio. Mr. Ogunye, good morning.
Good morning.
And thank you for joining us.
Good morning.
In fact, that's what Senior Advocate of Nigeria, Sam Kargbo, has reacted to for starters this morning on the show. And he's talked about discretion, which is what I want you to speak to. With effect to Section 305, how much discretion has the President exercised with respect to that particular section of the Constitution, particularly as it has to do with the suspension of the governor and the State Assembly?
Discretionary power in a constitutional democracy with a written constitution is not given so much a pride of place, because constitutional provisions are written, they are known, they can be interpreted, but except the Constitution allows that discretion to be exercised, the authority vested with that power may not be able to exercise that discretion. But I understand that the discretion that Sam Kargbo SAN must have been talking about is a preliminary decision made by the President, and always made by the President on matters like this, whether we've reached the point for a declaration of a state of emergency or a proclamation of a state of emergency. And when you look at that, you agree with me that this is a matter of facts. The facts you are relying on to say that we've not reached that stage of a proclamation of a state of emergency may be the same facts the President had relied on to reach a different conclusion. And when matters are like this, partisans are not helpful. There are people who say, oh, we've not reached that point. There are people who say that we've reached that point. And for me, once a power is given to be exercised, and there are checks and balances in the exercise of that power can be exercised. For example, if after the proclamation of the state of emergency and gazetting of that proclamation, the President is not able to muster a two-thirds majority vote in the National Assembly in support of that proclamation fails. But usually, issue of emergency, political emergency, are matters of security. I mean, we're not talking about a landslide, we're not talking about sea surge here, we're not talking about that, or medical emergency, okay? So we're talking about a political emergency. This is usually a matter of security, and usually parliamentarians tend to defer to the executive when it comes to the issue of security. But they will come and say that, yes, we are in the executive. We've had a national Security and Defense Council meeting. We've received reports. Pipelines are being blown up. There are threats to that effect. River State is so important to Nigeria in terms of revenue generation and the location of the IOCs, etc., etc. So we've reached that point. And because there are also political consideration across the aisle, across the entire divide, when you talked about the issue of revenue, you could see, the recent tax reforms, the heat it generated, where some people say, no, we won't get any money. So if some states within Nigeria, not in that region, have senators who could see this from an economic point of view, for example, that and that alone may sway them one way or the other. This crisis is coming. We've reached 2,000 or 2 million barrels. Now, what's going to happen to our revenue and so on and so on. So, different considerations, but essentially, it is a matter for the president to decide whether we've reached that point. And if I were to be very clear, I would say that given how intractable you say that in your preface, that crisis had been and how unreasonable on both sides the political actors had been, that decision to reach for the state of emergency was perhaps necessary. I would have wished for the president to go back to that presidential intervention at that time, to call the two sides. The Supreme Court has ruled. So what do you gain by this? You are from the same political party. I'm even maybe some interloper, meaning the president, because an APC president, the president of Nigeria now. So why can't you work together? So wait for 2027 for the next election, if you feel so strongly that you want to remove your governor. But this has implications for our democracy, for everything and all that. See whether they could bring them together before reaching out for this. I had advocated that publicly. And I had disagreed with those people who were coming on television that time and saying that the president had no local standing. Who is he to intervene? Who is he to forge a peace accord and all that? And people were just discussing as if they do not understand that in a country like ours, you need that kind of thing, because usually you're dealing with politicians who are engaged in perpetual brinkmanship. What will I gain? What will I get? So it's not essentially about the people. So if they can be at peace with themselves and not disturb the society, all the better. But I guess that a lot of people were, on both sides were saying, no, we're not good. Let's reside from that agreement.
Right.
Because if that agreement had held, I was here in the studio, and, the person who was interviewing me was asking, was there a provision in the Constitution for representation of the budget? Is that not too oppressive? I said, what do you mean? In the United States of America, Barack Obama openly, the global audience was watching, was sworn on the oath by Rehnquist, the CJ of the United States, the Chief Justice of the United States. And some lines were missed in administration of the oath. The following morning, Rehnquist came to the White House to re-administer the oath. So there's nothing that is cast
in stone.
In stone. If that was necessary at that time, which was the same conclusion the Supreme Court reached, why didn't you reach for that, and why the grandstanding?
Mr. Ogunye, as of this morning, is Governor Fubara, his deputy, and members of the State Assembly, are they suspended as of right now?
They are.
The National Assembly has not ratified
it.
By
the force of the proclamation. We can have an argument as to whether that suspension will only take effect after the ratification by the National Assembly.
Is it an argument or what the Constitution says?
After the ratification by the National Assembly. But what has happened historically in Nigeria? In 1962, we had a constitution, independence constitution. What has happened historically in Nigeria during the Western Regional Crisis? In 2004, 2003, 2004, we had a constitution. The Plateau precedent, the Ekiti precedent. We have constitution now, right? What usually is happening is that once that proclamation is gazetted, in anticipation and expectation that there will be an eventual declaration, things start to happen. Okay? And so, even the political actors or gladiators themselves will willingly see themselves as having been suspended.
But 3052, Mr. Ogunye, Section 3052 says the president shall immediately after the publication, which he did yesterday, transmit the copies of the official gazette. And the president said that it's been gazetted, right? He said transmit the copies containing the proclamation, including the details of the emergency, to the president of the Senate, the Speaker of the House of Representatives, each of whom shall forthwith convene or arrange for a meeting for the House of Reps or the Senate, as the case may be, to consider the situation and decide whether or not to pass a resolution approving the proclamation, Mr. Ogunye.
Exactly.
So they need to approve this.
Exactly. I'm familiar with the provisions. I should be familiar with the provisions.
Certainly.
I'm saying that in terms of procedure, there's a proclamation. Indeed, the Constitution is so worded that that proclamation is not regarded as a full-fledged declaration of a state of emergency until and unless there is an approval or affirmation. So there's a proclamation gazetted, transmitted to the National Assembly, and then there will be a vote on it. If the vote rejects that proclamation, what happens? The proclamation and all that is associated with it in terms of the steps the president as dictator should be taking will collapse. Okay? In which case, the governor and the House of Assembly will say they are still intact. They've not been removed. Okay? But if it is then affirmed or approved, it continues to take effect. I'm saying that historically in Nigeria, once that proclamation is made, everybody, sit back and accept that, oh, this is what has happened, because it's a delicate subject. As a matter of fact, it is debatable whether some of the things that the president has said, are sustainable, because after that, the National Assembly will set the terms. If you read the provisions further down, it will tell you that they will set the template, the terms.
The details.
They will usually pass an emergency powers, act or something, not just a resolution, to prescribe how the emergency powers will be exercised during that period. Okay? And if the 6-month period is over, they are also the person to extend it, agree with an extension, at that point. So it is essentially a duty to be performed between the executive branch of government and the legislative branch of government.
So let's I want you to resolve two things. So if they approve it, this is a shorter question. Is it sacrosanct? Must it be 6 months, given I saw the last provision of that 305, that they can come in at any time? I don't know. So you may be giving us a legal interpretation whether 6 months is sacrosanct. It must be 6 months. That's on one question.
Yeah.
On the other one is, I also want you to speak to the issue of suspending a governor in an emergency situation, which people have argued there is not governor, deputy, House of Assembly members, elected officials, that's the best way to put it, in an emergency situation, because that's the subject of debate right now. So two questions.
So the first question is if they agree. Is that the question?
Yeah. Well, if they agree for this to hold, the proclamation to come into effect as a formal declaration of emergency, state of emergency, whether it can be muted in 3 months or it must go the long stretch of 6 months. That's the question.
And the other part about the suspension.
Yes.
But the situation that warranted the declaration of a state of emergency could indeed improve so fantastically that that period may be revisited. And then the executive can then go back to the National Assembly and say, sorry, the situation has improved. We no longer need a state of emergency. So it's not sacrosanct that it must be 6 months. No. It's just that the Constitution has prescribed a time frame, a period for which the emergency should last. It mustn't extend without a renewal, and all that, so that we don't have a full-blown dictatorship. The second question has been a question that has not been resolved, even by the Supreme Court. And here I reference the case of the Plateau State government and the House of Assembly of Plateau State, whereas the Attorney General of the Federation. It's reported in 2006, 3 Nigerian Weekly Law report, part 967, at page 346, I think. And that case was a case in which the Plateau State government, quote and unquote, after the declaration of a state of emergency and the assumption of office by Brigadier General, now late, MC, Chris Ali, was made the
sole
administrator. And so that action was instituted at the Supreme Court. And a preliminary point was taken in that case. Whether, as at the time of institution of that action, those who call themselves this Plateau State government had the virus, had the right, had the local standing to approach the Supreme Court, haven't been removed by suspension. And the Supreme Court treated the preliminary point. Some people, legal historians and lawyers have said that the Supreme Court dodged its responsibility on that occasion, because the issue was whether indeed in the substantive matter.
So that means it was instituted after the emergency was declared.
And the substantive issue in that matter was whether, the declaration of state of emergency connotes or denotes or, implicates that democratic structure must be demolished. And the Supreme Court then said, look, you are no longer in office. The only person that could authorize this is the sole administrator. Meaning that, so if today, Governor Fubara and the legislature in Rivers State were to approach a court in the name of Rivers State, they will tell them, sorry, based on stare decisis and precedent. So that issue has not been resolved. And you see lawyers coming to say that, oh, it's constitutional, it's not constitutional. That's enlightened opinion.
Well, the NBA disagrees totally.
The NBA can disagree totally.
So is the NBA wrong?
That's the enlightened opinion of NBA. I'm telling you that the court, the Supreme Court of Nigeria, has not pronounced, and historically in Nigeria, incidentally, right from 1962, when we had the cases that, came after Adegbenro and Akintola, 93 Privy Council, William Sama Jagodumi, and so on and so forth, the courts have always validated that kind of suspension. In Western region, Akintola was suspended. Majakodumi was a sole administrator, which is something I will allude to. And in under Obasanjo, in Plateau State, Chris Ali, and then Brigadier General Oluri. Incidentally, both of them are late now. But finally, if I may, or not finally, I don't know.
We have 30 seconds.
30 seconds. I'm not very pleased with the idea, because we talk about democratization and demilitarization. It is not, the norm that when you are declaring a state of emergency and you want to appoint a sole administrator, you should bring a military man or a military retiree. Obasanjo did that, Oluri, and they were retired at the time. So, but I've just shared with us here that in Western region, a civilian government of Balewa made a civilian Majekodumi, the administrator of Western region. So, if we must take demilitarization seriously, I don't know the security reports at the disposal of the president to warrant that, blowing off of pipes, creeks, and all that. So go and bring a naval admiral or whatever, a naval officer, retired officer. But I would have wished that, in the spirit of continuous civilianization of a country that, be under military dictatorship,
and that's a compelling aspect of the conversation. And I'm just wondering if it is, antecedent that gives legitimacy to declarations of state of emergency and debatable, suspension of democratically elected leaders. But clearly, it's an ongoing conversation.
No, but in 2013, President Jonathan declared state of emergency in those 5 states, and yet no democratic structures were removed in the face of war.
All right.
So it depends on the
worst scenario.
In the worst scenario, and yet that didn't happen.
All right. Mr. Ogunye, thank you so much. We've been talking with Mr. Jiti Ogunye, a legal practitioner who has joined us here in our Lagos studio. Thank you so much for your time.
Yes, okay.
All right. We'll continue the conversation as we should. We'll also be looking at the moral and political implications of the declaration of a state of emergency in